I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my charged co-host, Brett.
Charged, discharged, uncharged, dead.
Dead.
Those are all words that would apply. It's been a long few weeks. I'm very, very tired. But
Brett, I think you've hit just about every time zone in the last 3 weeks. Almost all of them. A lot of travel. And only about half of them were for the podcast. The other half were for your day job.
It's true.
We need to pick a lane.
It's been a busy time. But, the next few weeks, I'm at home, so I'm happy about that.
Only a few weeks, but it's really good to be here. And thank you guys for tuning in today, because I don't know where this lines up with our other podcast. But our other podcast, we finished up West Memphis 3, and we had a theories episode. This might be a little bit of a spoiler, but whatever.
It's not.
It's not a spoiler. A lot of people did not understand the nuanced explanation I gave about my theory, which is basically charging decisions. Like, when does a prosecutor bring charges and what burden of proof basically you need to have at different levels of the case, and is it ethical, unethical to bring cases that you think are difficult to win? And what does that mean, difficult to win? And whose perspective? All these sorts of questions. Very good questions, by the way. And it kind of reminded us that, maybe it would be good to talk about what goes into charging decisions and when, what sorts of rules govern that.
And look, this is one of those things that it's very easy, particularly if you're on the outside, to just be like, well, you should only charge a case if you're absolutely certain that the person is guilty, right? Because most times that's probably true, frankly. The run-of-the-mill cases that a prosecutor's office deals with, there's no doubt. I mean, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a shadow of a doubt, no doubt at all. They've confessed, they're on camera, their DNA's everywhere, their fingerprints are everywhere. Everybody saw them do it. There's just, the average case is a slam dunk. Where the job is hard is in those close cases where you have a situation. I mean, just to give you sort of a few possibilities, and just think this through if you're out there in the world. There are cases where you have good evidence, but it's going to be close. There are other cases where you have evidence that you can't present to a jury. That happens too, where you'll have a prosecutor, police who know someone is guilty because they know a bunch of stuff they could never get into trial. And that happens, right? Could be for any number of reasons. Could be that you have a witness who won't testify. You have a hearsay problem. You have some sort of constitutional issue. Maybe something gets suppressed. It's not going to come in, right? And that's when you're faced with these really difficult questions about whether you move forward or not in a case. And that's where prosecutors really earn their money. And that's sort of what we want to talk about today through the lens of the West Memphis 3.
Let's start with the easy question. You do not have to have beyond all shadow of a doubt. I don't even know what the phrase is. You may have heard on TV, without a shadow of a doubt, absolutely slam dunk. There's absolutely no hypothetical that can fit into something. That is not the standard you need either to win a conviction or to bring charges. Now, on those difficult cases where the evidence may be there, but there may be additional issues along the way, right? You don't indict a case and then go straight to trial. As Brett says, there's a lot of procedures along the way. There's a reason why there's a path to trial. There are suppression motions. There are different arguments, sometimes interlocutory appeals up to the circuit courts to settle legal questions that may have circuit splits that are unsettled among other courts. All those sorts of issues may present it to be a knotty, complex case to bring. But when you look at certain cases, like let's look at the West Memphis 3 in terms of the investigation and what was known at the time, that is the lens in which you look at with respect to whether you bring an indictment and against whom as well.
And West Memphis 3 is really interesting because if you just look at what the prosecutors knew at the time, it's really hard to forget what we know now, but do it. Like, you're capable of this. So put yourself in the shoes of the prosecutors at the time. So you have a situation where you have a confession from an individual who claims to have been there and participated in the crime. Now, if you look at that confession, there are problems with it. We went through some of the problems. But you also have a situation where this person appears to be giving you evidence that he really shouldn't know. Things like the injuries to one of the person's faces, the mutilation of another child. Now, look, moving forward, we've got all sorts of thoughts about that and reasons to think that that wasn't accurate and he was fed that and everything else. But remember, we're just talking about the time. You have a prosecutor who's been given evidence from the medical examiner who's saying there was a castration, there was a knife. You have a knife that's found in a lake, and you have experts who are telling you this is consistent with some of the injuries we're seeing. You have the person who is implicated by the confession is someone who is known to be violent, who also has sort of strange, unusual beliefs, who, everyone in the neighborhood is telling you is a dangerous person. You have evidence you're never going to be able to get in, kind of like we were talking about. You have all these people who told the police at various times that Damien Echols confessed to them, that he said what happened, and then recanted their stories later on and refused to testify. So you've got that in the back of your mind. And, you don't have a lot in the forensics world, but you got like your fibers, right? You got some fibers that match various people, and the fibers are always interesting because they're common fibers. I mean, you'd find them like at Walmart, but it is the case that the experts at the time said, we took this fiber, we compared it to all the clothes in all the suspects' houses and all the victims' houses, and the only one it matched was, Jason Baldwin's house, right? So, you're seeing all that. You're the prosecutor. You have 3 children who've been brutally murdered. What level of doubt in that circumstance where you believe you got the right guys? What concern about what a jury might do? What level of doubt would be sufficient for you, despite all that evidence, to not prosecute? And I will tell you this. West Memphis 3 is hard because people have decided that this was a wrongful conviction. But we see this all the time in other cases where, frankly, prosecutors have a lot less evidence than they had in West Memphis 3, where people are like, why don't they just prosecute? Why don't they do this? Like, they've got X, Y, and Z. And we always have to be like, well, that's just not enough, right? But I think if you actually put yourself in the shoes of those prosecutors and you do it honestly and you don't do it with 20/20 hindsight, you'll see, number one, how difficult a situation that is and how hard it would be not to prosecute. And it's not clear to me, despite where I came out on West Memphis 3, that it would have been correct not to prosecute. In fact, I've said if I was in that circumstance, I would prosecute them. Absolutely. It's been so long, I've already put it on my mind. Jesse Miskelly, because of his confession. And I think it's hard. I think it's really hard to get to not prosecuting.
So in addition to that, and we've covered cases before where everyone kind of knows who did it. It's like the boyfriend or the husband or something. And we're telling the story and everyone's like, why aren't they bringing charges? Here's the other thing. When you look at the West Memphis 3 investigative files, they went down lots of paths. It was not a tunnel vision. And so when you look at all the other leads, there's not like a second best theory. So you have the victims' families before you. You have 3 people who, one has confessed multiple times. The other one, by hearsay, by other people say that he's confessed. And you have like other pieces, the fibers and the knife. And there's no second best. It's not like if it's not them, we've been investigating this other lead and that might be who it is. So based on the investigation, and I'm talking about at the time, this is the best case that they have. If they don't bring a case, statute of limitations can run and then no one will ever be prosecuted. So you can imagine at some point with all this evidence, they think they've exhausted all their leads. Go listen to our episode. I think there are additional leads they should have run down, or maybe they did and I just don't know about it. But let's say they're like, we've reached the end of our investigation. This is all we're ever going to have. It's charge or don't charge. And you can see that it's a difficult case and you say, well, we've done our part. These are the people we think who have done it. There's no second best case. We haven't investigated a second case, right? All those other people were cleared. Lots of people they interviewed and interrogated and investigated were ultimately cleared. There's no viable case against them. So they bring the case because they're like, well, this is the best case we have. We think that the case is there for them, but we will present it to a jury because that's the constitutional method that we have adopted by our founding fathers, is a jury of your peers get to decide. And you can have a slam dunk case and the jury can still decide that it's not enough. That happened to Karen Reed, right? And so there's always a black box aspect. But what you're doing is essentially letting the jury system play out, recognizing this is a hard case. I have brought cases before where I'm like, this is tough, not because I don't believe in my case, but because of issues within the case. The gun evidence was lost, or the chain of custody was corrupted in some way, or a witness has really faulty memories or lies all the time. Those are things that are independent from my own investigation or my own prosecution. Those are things outside of my control, and they can exist, and they do exist in every case as well. So that's another thing to think about when you're the prosecutor looking at this case. When we look at their files, I think they should have further investigated Mr. Bojangles, but there is no other person that they're like, well, if they get acquitted, we're just going to bring, charges against suspect XYZ. Are you guys like me? Do you have kids, pets, a husband, or just general chaos everywhere making a mess on your carpets or couches? Guys, we have a lot of jobs, a lot of kids, lots going on, and I just hate mess, but it's always here right now. Enter the Green Mitt Kit from Clean Safe Products. It is the easiest way to keep your fabrics looking brand new in 5 minutes or less. I love it. It's this beautiful green color, slips right on my hand, and I was able to clean my couch off so quickly. You would never know I had 4 kids jumping on the couch eating all of their Cheerios and snacks on it. And the process is simple. Spray the solution, wipe, rinse the mitt, and repeat. That's what I love at this stage of my life. Ease in cleaning. And if you can clean a kitchen counter, you can clean your couch. It works on carpets, couches, car seats, wool rugs, delicate upholstery, and even dry clean only materials. You can avoid the nightmare of bleach spots or harsh chemical sprays in your living room. The Green Mitt Kit is non-toxic, fragrance-free, and made with just 3 ingredients. And because it's soap-free, there's no sticky residue, so stains don't magically reappear the next day. And most important, I know it's safe for my babies.
And my wife and I like to joke that our house will be clean when the kids finally move out, given that we have a 5-month-old. That's not exactly an optimistic view, but fortunately, that's where the Green Mitt Kit comes in. It removes the spots and the stress that comes with having nice things in a messy household, and it lasts forever. 1 bottle of concentrate makes up to 16 full-size bottles of the soft surface cleaner, and you can try it risk-free. Clean Safe Products offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. So, what are you waiting on? Go to cleansafeproducts.com/prosecutors now to get $15 off the Green Mitt Kit. That's cleansafeproducts.com/prosecutors for $15 off the world's easiest soft surface cleaning solution.
Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
When I look at the West Memphis 3 case, there are things that they should have done, right? Like, I see shortcomings in the investigation. We talked about some of this. They should have followed up on more things. I wish that the medical examiner had been a little bit more thorough. I wish they'd been more responsive to the police. There are things they should have followed up on. But I'll say this, the thing about the West Memphis 3 case that's interesting is I don't see a lot of evidence of misconduct, right? Like, I don't see the prosecution hiding evidence. I don't see Brady claims. I don't see things they covered up. This is a very different case to me than the Pablo Velez case. You remember the Pablo Velez case where you have a prosecutor who knows their alternative suspects, who knows that the chief witness has told her that's not the guy. That is a very different circumstance, right? That's a place where your ethical obligation is to hit the brakes and stop. You don't have that here. You may have doubts, but you don't have the sort of things that I think would force a prosecutor to have an ethical obligation to stop. And when we talk about doubt, and we talk about reasonable doubt and what it means, remember, reasonable doubt, it's an objective standard, right? So we always say it's the amount of certainty you need to make important decisions in your life. That's the objective standard of reasonable doubt. But it's also subjective because it's in your life. Every individual juror is going to have a different definition for themselves of what beyond a reasonable doubt means. This is a feature, not a bug, of the jury system because that's what we want, right? We don't want it to be mechanical. We don't want it to be quote unquote scientific. We want it to be a jury of your peers coming together to reach a conclusion. And in the law, the standard that's often applied is not that no jury could find this. It's could any jury find it? And I think when you're a prosecutor, one of the really difficult things is when you're analyzing a case and whether or not to bring it, it's not so much are you convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. It's could a reasonable jury, based on the evidence you have, conclude that someone is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if that's true, then your obligation is to seriously consider bringing the case. I'm not going to say you have to, but I do think if you have that much evidence, it's something you have to really think about. And it's going to depend on the crime, right? Like if you've got a simple possession case, some low-level crime, probably if you're not 100% sure, even if you think you could get a conviction, you're much more likely to let that go because the danger of a wrongful conviction versus the danger of letting a guilty person go free, they're not that great, right? Here, though, once again, you have a triple homicide of 3 8-year-old boys. And, we talk about the pressure to bring charges. This is not so much that. It's more you have that obligation to pursue justice for the victims. And if you're not going to do that, then you really need to believe that no jury could find these people guilty.
And that's why there's this saying, you guys have probably heard it before, that if you've won every trial that you've tried, you haven't really tried hard cases. Because implicit within that is that not every case is going to be a slam dunk, and that's not the standard. It doesn't have to be a slam dunk because that's not reality. Put yourself in the victim's perspective. If the standard were that you'd have to have, 10 eyewitnesses, DNA, and a security camera trained on every person who's going to be brought to trial for a murder, we're not going to get justice for almost any victim because that's near impossible. We don't know when these murders are going to happen. They evade, authorities when they're doing it, all these sorts of things. And so put yourself in, and there often are conversations, honestly, with victims' families, especially when a prosecutor knows that it could be a difficult case, not because they don't have the evidence, but maybe because the defendant will come with a sob story of how they're not guilty because they've been so messed up and they were out of their minds, or they're going to bring an insanity claim and all these sorts of things. They prepare the victims' families when they do know that there's going to be a difficult case and it's going to be difficult at trial. But back to the what is beyond a reasonable doubt for people. Generally, what you need to make a major decision. Between me and Brett, we probably have different standards when we're ready to, say, quit our jobs. That's a major life decision. Not life or death, but is a major decision. And the bar in terms of like where we are, the financial security we need, the level of BS we've had to put up with, or whatever the factors are that go into you quitting a job, for example, a good job that could give you security, but you walk away from, is going to be different from each person. But the people who essentially sit on a jury and say nothing is good enough ever to convict, that's not what they actually think in life because they are not immobilized. They've decided to wake up in the morning and get in a car and drive to the courthouse. So they have made decisions in their life, and that is not the standard in which they hold themselves to, right? Because if you had to be sure that every time you got in the car, you didn't get into a car crash, you never get into a car. You can't ensure that. And so this is why it's very frustrating when we hear people on juries or talking about the jury system and saying that beyond a reasonable doubt is something that absolute surety, because we're talking about someone's life. No, we all make decisions that impact our own lives and other people's lives every single day. That standard will shift a little bit based on each person, but it doesn't mean you're immobilized to never act on anything. And the standard, I think a lot of people think beyond a reasonable doubt, would result in immobilization of any decision making, not just in the jury system, but also in your own lives.
And I feel like this is a subject we've talked about a lot in sort of a meta way throughout our podcast, because we've talked about sort of the system we have and improving it, and as opposed to sort of throwing the system out and starting over. Because there are people out there who see an injustice, they see a wrongful conviction, and they think, well, the fact that there's a wrongful conviction means the system itself is broken, because the system that allows a wrongful conviction is broken. And as we have often tried to say, you have to be very clear-eyed, sober, and realistic about this. A human endeavor is going to make mistakes, and it is always a balance, because you have to have justice, you have to have retribution for crimes, you have to have punishment, you have to have deterrent, you have to have all those things that the system produces. And if you don't have that, you're going to have chaos. The old saw about 10 guilty men go free than one innocent, or 100, whatever you want your calculus to be, it's never all of them. It's never better every guilty person go free than one innocent person go to prison. That's just not the way it is. And it really sucks when you're the innocent person, right? Like, that is really not great. But when you're trying to think about how are you going to do this, and we have a country of, we're approaching 400 million people. We have, I don't know the numbers, but it has to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of trials every year. I mean, certainly tens of thousands, certainly. And, with all sorts of different levels of complexity, of evidence, of circumstantial evidence, and direct evidence, and physical evidence, and DNA, and fingerprints, and all this other stuff. You're never going to have a system that can manage that perfectly, right? I mean, if we had 1 or 2 trials a year, we probably could do it, but we can't. And the hard part of being a prosecutor, and I think where the rubber really meets the road, is the same as for a jury, as Alice was saying. Jurors have a really heavy responsibility because they have to be willing to make a decision. It is easy to say, well, if I have any doubt at all, I can convict. Like, I basically need video of the guy doing it and a videotaped confession right afterwards, right? When you do that, you're shirking your responsibility. You are not taking that duty seriously, and the weight that it has and the pressure that it has of having to make a decision that could be wrong based on the evidence you have that affects someone else's life for the rest of their lives and could put them in prison. It's not easy. And when we did the West Memphis 3 thing, I just feel like there were a lot of people who didn't get it, right? They didn't understand what Alice was saying, because to them, it was like, well, if I had any questions, you shouldn't do that. And it's not a practical way to approach this, particularly if you put yourself in the shoes of the prosecutors back in 1993.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And this also goes hand in hand in its intention with what we've said before, which is you're never done writing a brief. You're never done investigating a case. At some point, right? You could truly, those of you who write papers for a living or write anything, that you could edit endlessly. There's always going to be something you can edit it. Does it actually get marginally better or better at all if you continue to edit the paper? Probably not at some point. Kind of same with an investigation. That's where the judgment comes in. And that's why you'll see prosecutors go to trial sometimes and you're like, why didn't they go test for this? It was an oversight. Not necessarily an oversight, but there are so many avenues you can take, and it is a judgment call when you decide of the resources and the time you have, which investigative leads you go down. And while we covered, West Memphis 3 in 24 episodes, we put no limit on ourselves, right? 24 episodes was really how long it took us to do it. That's not necessarily the case with investigators. They don't have endless time or endless resources because it is one of many cases in which they investigate. again, this is part of the system.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we'd love to have more resources. I mean, we talk about that all the time. More investigators, more prosecutors, more judges, more courts, more prisons. I mean, that'd be wonderful, right? But that's also a decision society makes.
And actually, someone in the chat here, I wasn't going to be this mean about it, but this is true. Not only if you continue to edit that article, let's go with that example, not only will it not get marginally better, at some point it will get worse because your eyes start to blur and you start going backwards and then the words have no meaning. Kind of same with an investigation. And here's why. Witnesses lose their memory after some time. So if you investigate 4 or 5 extra years longer and you're not getting more information, those witnesses lose bits of their memory as time goes on. Things get lost. Investigators move on to other cases and they're not as sharp and they can't remember for testifying purposes. People move away, people die. So actually, you are in a race against time as well in an investigation. And, more time doesn't always mean that your case is going to get stronger, especially when you have run down all the obvious leads to their logical ends and there isn't anything more.
And there's some questions that just aren't possible to answer. And I think you have to factor that in as well. Think about all the cases you really care about out there. I mean, maybe you really care about West Memphis 3 and you think they're innocent, so you wish they'd never been tried. But there have to be cases that you think the person is guilty, whether it's Scott Peterson or Casey Anthony. In every one of those cases, there is some question. We say this all the time. You're never going to know everything that happened. There are always going to be things that are inexplicable. Think of the Karen Reed case. There are things about that we don't know. We don't know exactly when her light was broken. I mean, maybe John did throw his drink at the light. I mean, maybe he did that, or maybe it broke when it hit his arm. I don't know. I don't need to know that, frankly. I don't really know how the scratches were caused in his arm. I have no idea. Could have been various things. I don't need to know that because I have all the other evidence that he was hit by her car. So to me, that's not a problem. It is a problem for other people. And we talked about this sort of different standards. Think about Scott Peterson. We don't know how Lacey Peterson was killed because her body was found so much later and was degraded so much. I mean, she probably was strangled or smothered or something like that. But we don't have enough evidence to be able to say that. In the Casey Anthony case, there are holes in that case. It's hard to say exactly what happened when. There are no body cases where we are really sure someone's dead, but you can't be perfectly sure. How can you know if you don't find their body? It could be a Gone Girl situation where she collected the blood and poured it all over the house so she could disappear and frame her husband. It's possible, right? How far are you willing to go with this? How much doubt are you willing to carry and make the decision whether or not to prosecute somebody? Most likely, all of you have cases where you are willing to put aside the things you can't know and move forward because you believe in justice and you believe there's enough evidence to convict. You might end up being wrong. I mean, maybe that thing you don't know is the thing that eventually proves actually this person was innocent all along. Hard to say, right? But like I said, this is why these are tough questions. And I think it's important when you're thinking about this stuff to really grapple with it because it's the heart of all this. And it's where a lot of cases can go wrong. And it's important because you need to know the limit. Whatever the limit is, you need to know where the line is that you wouldn't cross and that you don't want your public servants to cross because there will be a cost. There's always a cost. All these decisions cost something. They either cost justice for victims or they cost more potential innocence cases, more potential wrongfully convicted people, more crime. I mean, these are all potential costs and you're never going to get rid of all of them.
I feel like we've had this episode before. That's why I'm a little at a loss of what more to say. But if you guys have questions about this, if we're not making sense, I really do welcome the questions because I think this is the core of the jury system, right? And understanding what goes into these charging decisions helps people understand their civic duty when they are called to serve on a jury. So I think this is incredibly important. I have a friend right now who's serving this week on jury duty. And I think I've told this story before, but I had a judge that I clerked for who very much believed in the jury system, recognizing, and he's, been a judge for decades. He has seen the jury come out with decisions that he thinks is wrong. They've acquitted when he thought the evidence was overwhelming in favor of guilt, and vice versa. He has seen cases where he's actually stepped in and granted, which is very, very rare, right? Where he's like, no, the evidence actually isn't there. So this is not while I was clerking for him, but over the decades. Yet he believes in the jury system, and he does this beautiful explanation. You know what? I'm going to post it. There was an article in the Houston Chronicle who ran basically the speech that he gives to every jury that he's seated for the last several decades. And it is such a beautiful explanation of what the jury system is, though imperfect, and how it is duty to our country when we are called to do so with earnestness, but also without bias, because we are basically standing in the breach of democracy. And I am going to not do it justice. I have to find the actual words. I should have pulled it up before, but I will post it for you guys because I think it does a beautiful explanation of why what we're talking about now. Some of you are saying, well, this is boring. Why are we talking about this? I think this is so incredibly important because this is the underpinning of our entire criminal justice system. And I do think we all have a role to play in it. We can talk about this all day long. We're probably not serving on juries, to be totally honest. You all listening out there have a much better chance of being picked for a jury than either Brett or I will, just because of our backgrounds, and we're probably the ones actually litigating the cases.
And, let's be clear, serving on a jury is probably the most involvement in your government you're ever going to have. I love voting. I vote every time it comes around. I enjoy it. I don't do straight ticket voting because I like to bubble in all the pieces. I like to vote as much as possible. Your vote doesn't matter at all. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. As an individual, doesn't matter. As a collective, it does, obviously, because if all the individuals didn't vote, you'd have a problem. But the chances that your vote in any election really is going to matter, very slim. Juries, though, hugely important. The most sort of pure democratic moment you're ever going to have is sitting in a jury room with 12 other people and trying to convince them to go along with you and to agree with you and to vote one way or the other. It is so important, especially for individuals. And I think it's why we talk about it so much, and we're going to continue to talk about it. And like Alice said, we value your comments and your questions, and we know you're not always going to agree with us on this, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with sort of the way we would apply the standard. Like we said, it's subjective in so many ways. And if you were a prosecutor, maybe in 1993, you wouldn't have brought the case. But I think you really need to think about what that would have meant. It's so easy now because it's like, well, it would have meant we wouldn't have had wrongful conviction, in my opinion. That's really easy to say now. Really hard to put yourself in those shoes at the time. And just imagine that happened today and you had this vicious child murder and you got someone who's confessing and they seem to have corroborating evidence. And the prosecutor's like, I don't know. I just think of the Catherine Hoggle case, in Maryland. 2 beautiful children that disappeared because of their mother. I know she murdered them. You know she murdered them. Do we have the bodies? No. Can we prove it beyond any doubt? No. Would I charge her today with their murders? Yes, and so would you. And I think it is just critical because of the close relationship between the public and the justice system that these are things that we seriously consider. And we like to challenge you on this stuff. And I hope we continue to do that. And I hope we do it in all these cases that we talk about.
I think today's a great day to answer some questions too.
Yeah. Well, I have one other thing I want to talk about.
You go for it. I was just going to leave time. I was like, look, we're talking about this in under an hour.
I know. Well, there's one other thing that I want to talk about because I think it's important. And that's, as I think all of you know, yesterday, Charlie Kirk was murdered. He was assassinated by a coward. And Alice and I are in the talking business and we're in the arguing business. And we take positions that are not always popular. We talk about cases where people feel very strongly. And we have taken positions that I think have made people angry. And I'm sure there are people out there who think the world would be a better place if we didn't have this podcast. But I got to tell you, when I go somewhere like CrimeCon, I never think that somebody could show up and decide, on their own that they're going to put an end to that. You know, we meet with you guys, we don't have security, we hug you, we take pictures, we talk to you, and that's the way I want it to be. And that's the world I want to live in. And I think it's really important when something like this happens that everyone condemns it unequivocally. And it doesn't matter what you think about someone's views or their politics or their positions. I don't even like it when people preface this stuff with, I didn't agree with him, but this is wrong. You shouldn't have to do that. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm not criticizing you, but you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to worry that somebody's going to think just because you say someone shouldn't be murdered for their positions, that they're going to suddenly think I agree with them. No, that should just be the universal opinion, and it should be something that we all come together on. That's the world I want to live in. Alice and I were traveling yesterday when the news broke, and all I wanted to do was get home to my kids, you know. And when I got home, my daughter was asleep, and I went into her room, and she woke up and she saw me, and she was so happy. And all I could think was, his kids are never going to see him again. They're never going to have that. You know, they're never going to get to hug their dad because someone disagreed with him so much they decided to murder him. And I'm sorry, I don't think there's any gray area here, and I don't think you should either. And even if you don't want to do it because you think it's the right thing, do it selfishly, because let me tell you, it never ends. And it's never just one side. Every time something like this happens, somebody will say, oh, violence in the country? Welcome to the 1960s. Yeah. You remember the 1960s? Lots of people got shot and they got killed, and they were on both sides of the political spectrum. And was it a good thing? No. You know, Robespierre liked political violence so much that they called it the terror. And the guillotine that he used on his enemies was eventually used on him. So I think all of us need to be able to come together when something like this happens and just condemn it. I don't need a discussion. We don't need to talk about what the person thought on anything. Just condemn it. It is the heart of American democracy. It is everything we believe, that people should be able to disagree without fear of being killed because of what they think. And that goes for both sides. And it was just something I wanted to talk about.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. I honestly didn't know if I would be strong enough to be able to talk about that. But since you've brought it up, you know, we didn't cancel tonight, even though we had planned on talking tonight, even though I have zero interest in talking to anybody today, because as Brett said, what happened yesterday, the reason our country was founded, the country that I was born into, but that my ancestors are not from, the reason my parents came here, the reason that I have everything in my life is because this is a country based on the fact that we can have discourse, the First Amendment. We are able to speak. And so yesterday when the news broke, Brett and I were together, he saw me cry unendingly while the Uber driver asked us unending questions.
Unending questions.
And I could not, barely pull myself together. But we didn't cancel tonight because we do believe in discourse. We don't believe in violence. We said that from the very beginning of this podcast is many of you will disagree with us, and I welcome it. Brett and I disagree on West Memphis 3. And by the way, on lots of other things that maybe you guys don't even see because it's not on the podcast, because our entire lives are not on the podcast. And that's the thing. We speak because we care about these issues, and we respect people no matter which side of the aisle you're on, if there are these aisles. If you speak with an intent to understand the other and to change hearts and minds through words and not through violence. Yes, when you pick up a gun and you steal away someone's life, whoever is on the other end of that, that is a cowardly movement. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you're using violence versus words. And this applies in so many situations, but especially yesterday because Charlie was in front of his family and thousands of people watching, people knowing that it would be all over the internet because obviously people were filming. They did that rather than have a conversation with him. When that happens, it is the absolute crumbling of society, not just the American society. I know many of you who listen are not American. It's not just about that. When we stop talking, we do devolve into chaos and tyranny and self-destruction. There is no way forward if we can't have discourse. And we love all of you. A bunch of you have left, the live, which is fine because this is a very heavy topic. But I think it's so important. And this is why we do this podcast. So oftentimes people, at CrimeCon, I don't know how many of you asked us, why do you do the podcast? Or why do you do the podcast and still amidst your day jobs and all your kids? And the reason we do it is we believe in discourse. We believe in having intelligent discourse with all of you. We've said that to so many of you in person just last week. We believe that you can use your brains and talk, and know that many of you disagree with us about cases. It doesn't even have to be about, like metaphysical issues. It could be about a case where we can disagree and have vibrant and amazing conversation, because we are all individuals with dignity and we are all different. That's why we disagree. And that is a beautiful thing. And so there is not some beautiful, wonderful point here, because this is a tragedy and it seems senseless, and it is senseless. And I can't wrap this up into a pretty bow, and I'm not going to, except to say, talk with each other, talk with us. Never turn to violence. When you do, it is the beginning of the end. And I don't want to believe that this is the beginning of the end. This is a country that I'm so glad I get to be here. What other child of immigrants with parents who didn't speak English when they came here can say that they not only graduated from, high school, but then got to go to the premier institutions that no one in my, stage of life should ever get to go to. It's impossible, except when you have this democratic way, this way that treats people as people with dignity, that I'm not put into a box because of the way I look, for whatever characteristics I am. And I believe in that version of freedom.
And look, I mean, we talked about earlier jury duty and how people can have an impact. The good news is that the number of people out there who would actually do something like this, I hope, is very small. The bad news, like I said, we have almost 400 million people in this country. But I think all of us do have something to contribute. I don't think it is a coincidence that as our rhetoric has gotten more heated and more violent and more angry and more hate-filled, that you are seeing stuff like this more and more. Somebody tried to kill the governor of Pennsylvania. They just burn his house down. Like, nobody even talks about that, right? Somebody mentioned Minnesota. There were legislators murdered in Minnesota. You have this. You had 2 people who tried to kill Trump during the election.
I went to, school mass with my kids this morning, and us parents pulled together money to make sure that there was a police officer standing outside the doors. I'm sitting there with my 7-year-old, and we have to explain why the doors are locked and there's a police officer outside, and it's not touch a truck day. It's to make sure that we can go into a house of worship in the morning with elementary school kids.
Yeah, because somebody decided that the way to make a political point is to shoot up a mass. And I know there's some mental health issues there as well, but remember, people who have mental health issues are more susceptible to this kind of rhetoric. And so maybe just all of us as individuals could try and tone it down a little bit. It doesn't mean you have to agree with anybody. I mean, you can oppose people vociferously. You can oppose them every step of the way. You can organize against them. You can vote against them. You can raise money. You can run for office. There's so much you can do without all that comes with it. The hate, the anger, the violent talk, the rhetoric. It is possible.
And, this is the way I deal with it. Everyone deals with it differently. Clearly, Brett deals with it differently. But can I suggest, if you feel that volume being turned up, or you feel, hatred rising up in you, because it's hard not to be angry about these things. And it's okay to be angry, by the way. Just anger is good. Resentment is not, because that's when awful things happen. Step away from social media. Look, we exist on social media. We get that. Step away from social media for a day, for longer, whatever you need. When in moment of crisis, don't turn to X. Don't turn to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Step away and go hug a tree, quite literally. Go hug a person. Go have a conversation with a person. The reason CrimeCon was so incredible, and we talked about this last time, was we got to see you guys in person. We didn't just get to read emails from you or see your chats while we're doing this, or respond to you in DMs and our, social medias. We got to see you, and that was so much better to get to hug you and see you and talk to you in person than just talk to you through the internet, because we are special. Humans are special, and there is absolutely nothing that can stand in the place of real human interaction. So that's what I do, as some of you joke, that I do monitor what's going on online, but I've taken a very deliberate step in the last couple of years to step away from social media specifically because of this, because I know that I can be very emotional and I can feel kind of the volume turn up in myself as I see it around me. And by the way, the algorithms on the social media, it is written in order to turn up the volume. And so you know yourself best and you know what you can handle. But for me, I know that means, for example, that I just don't read the 1-star reviews. That's good for me. That is very good for me. So please keep leaving your 1-star reviews. Never going to see them. That's just how I deal with it. But find ways that you yourself can do that and how we can help too. We try to use explanations. It's great to have strong opinions, but be able to explain them. And we've said that from day one as well, because if you can explain them, then you're not just running on emotion alone. You're running on reason.
And look, we don't pretend to be perfect on this. Nobody is. All you can do is the best you can do. Last thing I'll say on this, Murder Shelf Book Club talked about how tolerance is a virtue. I would just remind people that tolerance, you don't tolerate things you like. Tolerance means accepting other people who you really don't like and totally disagree with, right? That is a virtue. And I think it's really the heart of not only our country's democracy, but really all of them. And just remember, free speech, freedom, representative government isn't the thing that we've had for most of our history. For most of our history, we have not been free. You have not been able to say what you want. It's authoritarianism, dictatorship, monarchy. That's how people have been ruled. And we're trying to preserve, as Benjamin Franklin said when he was walking out of the Constitutional Convention and someone asked him, what do we have, a republic or a monarchy? And he said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And that's the whole point, is these are things that every generation has to preserve. And that's the task that's before us now. So thanks for letting us rant about that, but it was something I thought it was important to talk about.
No, I think that's right. Thanks for being brave enough to bring it up.
No, I just can't shut up. That's my problem.
No, that's the fact that I can shut up tells you how deeply it affects all of us. Well, guys, thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for engaging in discourse. In a lot of ways, I know we're preaching to the choir. You guys are the ones who have these debates with us, and we love it. And I hope that over the years, we've built that trust with you, that you can disagree with us, and that we love having that discourse with you. And we'll keep talking, and I hope you talk too. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. It's just really hot.
You have
and
a
my
shirt
hair,
on.
my hair has it's humid, so my hair is kind of grown.
That doesn't happen to me. I don't have to worry about that.
It doesn't happen anyway. Oh, there we go.
There you go. She does have a shirt on, everybody.
I have a
We've
shirt on.
confirmed
I have
it.
a shirt on. It's just still hot here. So, and the reason I'm a little late is when you have to wrestle a couple alligators, times 4 alligators to bed. You have to dress for the occasion, which is to say it's an athletic event.
Yeah.
This September, CBS hits are streaming free on Pluto TV.
I'm coming in hot.
For this month only, you can watch full seasons of the CBS shows you love. From the courtroom drama of Matlock to the heroics of Fire Country. Go back to where it all began in NCIS Origins, or watch the hilarious hauntings of ghosts, all for free. Full seasons of the CBS shows you love. This month only on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.